So, in actual fact, carrying on from my last video, I'm actually wanting to see if I can become involved in Disabled People Against the Cups, because I'm stuck at home and I need activity. So I might actually see if I can. I don't know if they take volunteers. What I can do at home. There's limited amounts I could do at home. I'm already a member of quite a few groups, but get meet online. But I might see if I can take part in that when I've got time. It's hard because there's with my OCD and all the other issues I have, it's not always easy to get involved in stuff. But when my brain feels relatively clear, I'll see if I can get involved in that. But anyway, what I wanted to say in this video, sorry, I'm just trying to collect my thoughts. That was quite a strongly worded video in my last one, so it's got me a little bit roused up. But yeah, so I just wanted to add some more things to what I was saying last time about gentrification of disability. So I was talking about how autism has become really, really meaningless now, and the issues around that, both philosophical but also practical, where autism has become so overused and applied to so many different people that it's completely lost any sense of internal coherence. Now I realise I need to tread carefully. The reason being is that I fully acknowledge that it's far better now than the situation we were in, say, 10, 20 years ago, where autism was actually the opposite extreme. Autism was severely underdiagnosed, and many people and have ended up with very significant problems as a result of that. Because at one point in time, autism was seen as a very, 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 very rare condition. And the only ones who were diagnosed were those with very classical presentations. When I say classical, by the way, that's always in reference to the original idea about what autism was, which was a very, very extreme understanding. And that's actually the case with all psychiatric conditions. The very first discussion of a psychiatric condition is always focused on those with the most extreme presentations. It's a case with every condition, and then what happens is over time they start to expand the net and realise that the condition affects far more people, and it's a lot broader, and that happens with all conditions. That always happens. There's always a psychiatric broadening, no matter what condition we're talking about, not just psychiatric conditions, medical conditions as well. They always initially focus on the most extreme cases. So it's good and inevitable, but obviously autism has broadened over time, and that's a good thing. But there has to become a point, however, where it needs to stop broadening. Because if you broaden it too much beyond a certain point, a condition loses internal coherence. You either need to stop broadening it, or alternatively you need to create new diagnostic labels. I'd argue that we need to create new diagnostic labels. I generally think that it's good that people get diagnosed if they're struggling, because diagnosis is really, really important. I'm not against diagnosis. Hell man, I've got a diagnosis. I support diagnosis. I think diagnosis and labels, I prefer to call it diagnosis because we can all be labelled with anything. Diagnosis is the official term. I hate it when people say, oh, I'm against labels. Yeah, because you label all the time. Everyone gets labelled. It depends whether or not the label's good or bad, basically. Unofficial or official. So I support diagnosis when a person is in need of support. Okay, I want to make that very clear. What I disagree with is that all of these people should be diagnosed autistic, because autism needs to be limited, I would say, to those with a very significant clinical impairment in the original definition: social interaction, communication, and repetitive behaviours. If it's not, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And the whole point of Asperger's was to show that a whole group of people existed who were autistic, who had autism essentially, but were different to that original classic group. You know, they were a broader category. That's what happened when you broadened autism. You introduced Asperger's, people who could talk, who had high verbal intelligence, who could sound intelligent, who maybe didn't come across at least on first impression, as disabled. It's more like an invisible disability. But nevertheless are still significantly socially impaired. It's just that the impairment is a lot less obvious because it's more around social interaction and more non-verbal communication, whereas verbal communication is less impacted and can actually sometimes be relatively pretty good actually. As you can see from my videos, I can talk very well and so on. I often say actually that's one of my big disabilities, the very fact I can talk so well, people don't notice how disabled I am. But yeah, so Asperger's was a meaningful diagnostic category. I sort of feel it was a mistake to get rid of Asperger's. I feel what we needed to do instead was to introduce more distinctions. Calling everything autism as if it's all the same thing, I feel doesn't really help anyone. And like I said, the whole point about a clinical significant impairment I do feel has been lost, because autistic traits, I use that word very loosely, I'm actually not particularly keen on the word autistic traits, so maybe I'll just call them traits, but traits anyway, actually exist in many people who are not clinically significantly impaired. So I can give an example. My brother, he is socially awkward, he had very strong obsessive interests as a kid, memorising train timetables, really intense, quite stereotypical interests in a sense, perfectionist. He even admits now he's not great with people skills, but he has a good job. He's a very good job, which he excels at. He functions perfectly fine. He's not disabled at all. He doesn't have any impairment. Would you describe him as autistic just because he has some traits? No, you wouldn't. That would be absolutely absurd. And yet I do find this is what is happening now increasingly, where people who share quite a number of autistic traits and are socially awkward and maybe do find being around people difficult, but nevertheless can get by and can manage and can still have relationships and stuff like that, are actually being labelled autistic. I think that's really, really wrong. I think that autism should only be for those who have a clinically significant impairment. If you can get by in life and you can function, you might be a little bit socially awkward, you might have strong interests, you might stim a little bit, you might need routines a little bit, but if it's not impairing you, you're not autistic. It's as simple as that. You're not autistic, you don't have Asperger's, you don't have any type of autism, you just have traits. It's as simple as that. And I feel that actually even using the term autistic traits actually then is a little bit offensive for people who actually are disabled. It's got nothing to do with autism. At the very least, it's an autistic-like personality, but I just feel different names could be used, because even an autistic-like personality trivialises the experiences of those who actually are disabled. And that's where I feel that things are getting too extreme these days. Where people like Melanie Sykes are getting diagnosed autistic, that's what I mean. Now, I'm not saying Melanie Sykes doesn't have problems, I'm not saying that at all. She may well have struggles, I don't know her personal life, I cannot comment on what she goes through. She definitely may well have struggles. I am not dismissing her struggles, I'm not denying her struggles. What I am saying is that if she gets diagnosed with anything, it shouldn't be autism. End of. It should be something different. There needs to be a distinction, there has to be. I used to think, because basically, as I've already said, the traits existing in general population as part of natural variation, it's a bell curve. People who aren't autistic vary in their social skills. They vary in how much routine they need, and you often find that people who struggle a little bit socially also have a greater need for routine. The two tend to go hand in hand together. But there's kind of a natural variation, so not all neurotypicals are great at social skills, not all neurotypicals are really flexible, spontaneous types. No, everyone's different. Within neurotypicals, there are some people who find social skills quite difficult, actually, who maybe don't really like making eye contact, who maybe need quite a lot of routine. My mum was one of them. She wasn't autistic, but she was one of those neurotypicals who did find eye contact a bit difficult, who did need routine. She could read people really well. She wasn't autistic. But, she was one of those neurotypicals who wasn't like a super neurotypical, whatever that means. But you know what I mean? There are many people like that. Basically, my dad would be another one of them. He functions well, he's a bit eccentric, he definitely has traits, but he's not autistic. No, definitely not. He functions, that's what I mean. It would be absolutely absurd to say he's autistic, absolutely absurd, even though there are many things I can see in himself that I have, so I can see some genetics going on. He's not autistic though. He functions too well. Even though he was a loner at school and he had traits, but he's not autistic. So yeah, it just becomes absolutely absurd. Basically, we're taking natural variation and we're pathologising it. There has to be a line. When it becomes clinically significant impairment, that's when we diagnose autism, whether it be Asperger's or the classic type. It used to be quite clear where I was. I used to be a classic example of someone with Asperger's. A classic example. Someone kind of in the middle, not like mild, not like severe, someone in the middle, okay? Now, because of people like Melanie Sykes and that, I have to say I've got severe Asperger's. It's changed. Because I'm definitely not in the middle anymore, because I'm miles away from people like Melanie Sykes, and now I'm actually pretty severe with my Asperger's. I haven't changed. All that's happened is the broadening out. I've had to reassess where I am in the spectrum, basically. I'm not actually that keen on the word spectrum, but I'll use it for want of a better word. I'm more impaired than these people, so it kind of destabilises my idea of where I am. And either I have severe Asperger's, or I'm somewhere between Asperger's and classic autism, because I'm not classic autism, by the way, far from it, but I'm way more impaired than many of these people getting diagnosed today with Asperger's, and yet, before this massive shift, before it became acceptable to diagnose people like Melanie Sykes and people like that, who are functioning pretty well, I was just someone with classic Asperger's. That was what I had. It was a serious disability, but everyone knew that Asperger's was a disability. Now, because of the overuse of the word autism, it's just becoming absolutely meaningless, and it's really destabilising. So let me know what you think. Thank you for watching.